Friends, thanks very much for being here today. I'm very privileged and honoured to have this opportunity to speak about lay apostolic movements and lay apostolate from Vatican II to the Synod on Synodality, and particularly in the light of a Cardijn perspective. Cardijn being the founder of the Young Christian Workers Movement, La JOC, Jeunesse Ouvrière Chrétienne in French, and he was a major actor at the Second Vatican Council, and he spoke particularly on the issue of lay apostolate, which he defined in these terms, which you can see on the screen, as the lay or secular life of lay people, including all the problems of that life at every level, from local to international. And the second aspect was what he called the divine value of that life, to implement God's work and to transform life in the world. A transformation that he believed needed to take place with Christ and in the church, and which for him was needed to be incarnated in the affairs of the world. Yes, and if we look at the Vatican II documents, we can see that what Lumen Gentium in the chapter on the laity eventually adopts is very close to Cardijn's idea. It begins, what specifically characterizes the laity is their secular nature, who by their very vocation seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and ordering them according to God's plan. But most of all, in the ordinary circumstances of family and social life. That's where they act as a leaven within the world. And that's how, in fact, they make Christ known, particularly by the testimony of their lives. And particularly, Lumen Gentium notes that this is their special task, the special task of the laity to do this. And this is reinforced in Gaudium and Spes, which again notes that these activities, these actions, are specific to, but not exclusive to lay people. Importantly, it also notes that lay people, Catholics, Christians, need to work with other people, can and should work with other people who seek the same goals. That's quite important too. It's not an exclusivity of Catholic lay apostolate. It's an apostolate that people can take up and should take up with others. And again, that is their distinctive role as lay people. These are the teachings of Vatican II on that issue. Another big question which the Council addressed was, how do we form people to take on that lay mission? And for those who are familiar with Cardijn and the Young Christian Workers Movement, you'll see that Apostolicam Actuositatem, the Decree on Lay Apostolate, emphasises the need to prudently learn how to see, judge and act. Again, this is in the light of the ordinary experiences of life, which are looked at in the light of the gospel, leading to action. Now, Vatican II, it's quite interesting to recall. Those of you who've looked at Vatican II will remember that there was a very important group there called the Jesus Christ and the Church of the Poor group, many of the participants of which were in fact bishops who had been chaplains to the various specialised Catholic action movements, including the Young Christian Workers, the Young Christian Students, and the like. And what's important, and it's very great to see, is that in their meetings, they actually functioned as a review of life group, review of life being another name for the method, for the way in which they applied the See, Judge, Act to the circumstances of their own life. And here we see, it's recorded in the minutes of those meetings, the outstanding, amazing personal actions that were taken by some of the bishops. Those of you from Latin America will no doubt be familiar with Manuel Larraín, the Chilean bishop, who sold his episcopal ring to provide funds for projects for the poor, and eventually later transformed his episcopal palace, or not his, the diocese's episcopal palace, into social housing. I actually visited his home diocese, Talca, about 10 years ago, and they still remembered Manuel. Manuel, the old priests would say to me. They really loved him and respected the work that he'd done. And many others did similar sort of actions in their own circumstances. One in particular that I recall was by a Brazilian bishop, later a cardinal, Eugenio de Aro, don't ask me to pronounce it. Before building a cathedral in his new diocese, he specifically opted to ensure that there was a building of social housing for the poor of his, I don't know where it is now, but in his rural diocese. And similarly, this was taken up again in the famous Pact of the Catacombs at the end of the council, when a number of bishops met together, inspired by Cardijn's vow to consecrate his life to the working class, to decide on their own commitment to share their lives. And included in the pact that they made, become known as the Pact of the Catacombs, they committed themselves to sharing their lives with their brothers and sisters in Christ. And they even said that they will review their lives with them, with their priests, with the religious and the laity of their diocese. In other words, to practice the see, judge and act with their fellow Christians, Catholics from their diocese. Interesting point to reflect on 60 years later, to what extent that may have been implemented or not in those dioceses. But it's a perfect example, really, from Vatican II of the kind of walking together that I believe Pope Francis's synodality implies today. Now, moving to the question of lay movements, those of you who are familiar with Catholic action will recall that prior to the council, people spoke of Catholic action, first of all under Pius XI, as a participation of lay people in the apostolate of the hierarchy, sometimes of the church, it was said, and Pius XII changed the word to collaboration of lay people with the hierarchy. And John the 23rd himself changed it again, and he chose to speak of cooperation of lay people. But still, it was cooperation always in the apostolate of the hierarchy. Now we come to Vatican II itself, and we go back again to Apostolicum Actuositatem number 26, and we see that there's a 180-degree shift. Here we see that the emphasis is on the church, clergy and religious cooperating with the laity, in Latin cum laecis, and that's mentioned twice in that thing, that the church should be cooperating with lay people and with their movements. And in fact, number 26 emphasises that to a great extent. It speaks of creating councils at every level of the church, from parish level to international level, that will actually promote mutual coordination between the various lay associations and groups that exist at every level, from local to international level. And they even envisage a special secretariat in which those movements should be represented, as it says in Latin, suas partes habeant, have a role, have a part in the work of that secretariat. Here they're speaking specifically of the role, the part that the movements should play at that level. And again, the emphasis on cooperation, not with the hierarchy, but with the laity. Such is the teaching, or such was the teaching of Vatican II 60 years ago, anticipating what we say today about synodality, the emphasis being on the structural church, the clergy, the religious, cooperating with lay people and their movements. Here I want to recall also that at Vatican II, how did this all come about? Well, first of all, I won't say obviously exclusively from the lay auditors, because there were many, many bishops who were along this line, but they were supported by 40 or 50 lay auditors, or in fact, it's not 100%. They were lay auditors, but it's also important to remember that they were participants at a certain level. They participated very actively in a number of commissions, particularly the commission that drafted what became Gaudium and Spes, and also in the commission on the decree on the apostolate of the laity, Apostolicum Actuositatem. So sometimes we forget that actually at Vatican II, lay participants had a much more active role than we sometimes remember. Sure, the technical title was as auditors, but they were actually very involved actively in the drafting of at least some of the Vatican II documents. Another thing that's extremely important to note here about Vatican II was where those lay auditors came from. And here, if you can see a list on the screen of quite a number of them, some of them very famous names, many of them from the specialized Catholic action movements, some from Pax Romana, but also from a whole range of movements across the board of the various types of movements that existed in the church. And I think this is particularly important to remember because, again, technically, they were not there representing, inverted commas, those movements, but they were chosen from those movements. They were chosen because of their experience with those movements. And I believe that's particularly important to remember today when we think of the Synod on Synodality and the kind of things that we want to promote for the future. Because if we look at the Synod today, we'll see a large absence of those movements among the lay participants at the Synod. Stop. Now, how was all that implemented? Here we come to the Latin American bishops in 1968 at the Salam conference, which took place at Medellin in Colombia. And what I've put up on the screen for you to see is the contents of the English publication that publishes the 16 documents from Medellin. It's very interesting to see the structure of what they were trying to do and achieve. What you see in the red there is my highlights, the phrases that I've highlighted or the aspects that I've highlighted from that. Again, you will see, just as Cardijn spoke and emphasized the idea of transforming the world, so too Medellin emphasized the transformation of Latin America in light of the council. So it's transformation that they're interested in. And the second thing to see is how they see that happening. They see it at two levels, the human level, human promotion, and also at the Christian level, evangelization and growth in faith. But here's where we get to the part that's particularly interesting for us as lay people from lay movements or working with lay movements. If you look at the third part there on the visible church and its structures, what's first? Lay movements come first. In other words, the bishops at Medellin in 1968, looking at how they could implement the teaching of Vatican II, saw a great priority for the need and the work of the lay movements. And it makes sense because, again, if the focus of what the church is on about is transformation of the world, then and if the role specifically of lay people is to achieve that in their lives, in their communities, then it makes perfect sense that that is where the church should place its focus, first of all. And for this reason, I believe that even nearly 60 years later, 56 years later, Medellin is still a reference for us. Perhaps not in every paragraph, but particularly in the structure, which you can see here. And it was the first attempt, and in some respects, still the best attempt ever to implement lay Vatican II, giving a focus to a lay-led church with a focus on the world. Something really important, I think, that again, I feel is pretty much absent so far in the work of the Synod on Synodality, and that I really hope might come to the fore to a greater extent in the Second Assembly. Interesting to look at who were the key actors at Medellin. And well, one of them now on the left there, looking at the screen, is Blessed Eduardo Peronio from Argentina, who was one of the key persons who drafted the final report. I think here it's important to remember the role of Manuel Larraín again, even though he died in 1966, because he was also largely an architect of what the direction that Salam was taking at that time. And again, you'll see many of the bishops there, some famous names: Helder Kamara, Bogarin, Proagno, Angelelli, McGrath, many famous people who were from the council. And of course, also the priests, Francois Huttart, very famous in Latin America for his work, and of course, Gustavo Gutierrez, who kind of made his debut at this level at Medellin, giving direction for the church until today, in fact. But it's also interesting to look particularly at what the document says. We don't have time to go into detail, but at least we can look at something that it says. And it talks about the importance of going back to the theology of the laity that flowed from Vatican II. Here, I think this is important to think about today. Strangely enough, despite what Vatican II said, there really has not been a lot of work done on the theology of the laity since that time. Something to be picked up again today, hopefully, again in the Second Assembly of the Synod. Secondly, it speaks of the need to create what they call apostolic teams and lay movements. Again, the emphasis of the church and the need for the church to create those teams and to create and promote those lay movements that will act for the liberation and humanization of society. And again, we see the method that they promote based on the discernment of the current signs of the times, that we know in 3 words as the see and the judge and the act. And again, finally, we see the emphasis on close cooperation between those movements and the hierarchy, and which are therefore to be promoted. The big question that arises from all that is, well, what happened afterwards? Has that in fact been done? Well, that is really a very interesting question that we go beyond our session today. I will note, for example, some of the things that happened, particularly in Latin America. Anna will be the expert on this aspect, really, Anna Maria Bidigain. But it's rather tragic to recall so many things that happened in Latin America over the following 10 years of the late 1960s and 70s, where so many of the leaders of those lay apostolic movements, the chaplains, were killed, martyred. And in fact, so far, of course, we've seen Bishop Angelelli has been declared blessed, along with another priest and layperson, for his role in the work of promoting exactly what the Medellin Council of Salam in the light of Vatican II had promoted. And I believe this is true for the others as well. So we see consequences of that option. And similar things in a different way happened in other continents. We don't have time to sort of go into them today, but we know some of them. The rupture that they caused, the post-May 1968, the post-colonial period, and many other factors that occurred, the rise of the spiritual movements that happened in the subsequent years, that somehow led to a decline in the lay apostolic movements that were anticipated to be the front runners during the council and at Medellin. So here we come now. What do we do today at the Synod? If we look at the actual preparatory document, it raises a number of very good questions. How do we promote collaboration with those lay associations and movements? Very important question. It also recognises in the preparatory document that sometimes, often maybe, those movements remain kind of sidelined within diocesan dynamics, a real problem that needs to be addressed. And it also notes the divide that sometimes occurs within the church. And therefore, but on the other hand, it also looks more positively, asks the question, what can we learn from those associations, movements, and lay-led groups? However, the question is, the big question, or one of the big questions, there are many big questions. The strange thing is that despite what it says in the preparatory document, only 3 lay movements have been invited to participate in the Synod. In fact, all of them with links to Italy, Italian Catholic Action, the international representing the Italian style of Catholic Action, different from specialized Catholic Action, Focolare, founded in Italy, and an Italian refugee organization. A very strange and limited selection. And there really surely is a question to be asked here. Why so limited? Why so few? what will happen between now and the Second Assembly? What can be done to change this? It really is in direct contradiction even to the questions posed in the preparatory document, and it's clearly a decline from what happened at Vatican II. Very strange, something to be challenged that I believe we need to challenge in the 6 months left until October. And as I said, or to emphasise the point, even in the preparation for the Second Assembly, I see no mechanism to really integrate the work of those lay movements. From what I've read and heard, the movements are just simply advised to integrate into their parishes and dioceses and national bishops' conferences, where basically what happens is that their contribution gets lost. So these are the challenges that face us today that I think maybe we can discuss perhaps a little bit today, but which certainly need to be discussed in the next 6 months leading up to the Synod. Thanks very much.